A Beacon in the Dark by Noha Ijiachi. Chapter 31, A Hero's Duty. Two things became immediately clear as soon as Izuku stepped through the door. 1. Nighteye seemed to hold some kind of resentment in his heart for whichever reason. Izuku had no idea. 2. Izuku wasn't going to be able to make him laugh. Izuku was absolutely, utterly screwed. Mirio-senpai had been so helpful, cheerful, and gentle as he explained that he already spoke to Nighteye about him and gave Izuku pointers. Izuku was definitely grateful for his kindness, and he mulled over his advice, the fact that he had to make Nighteye laugh at least once while they made their way up the stairs, and well, Izuku wasn't a comedian, but maybe with a bit of luck, he could play on his biting, self-depreciating humor that always managed to drag a surprise laugh out the people around him, for better or worse. Whichever little flame of hope he had went out pretty much as soon as Nighteye must have laid eyes on him. Izuku was pretty sure that he could try to dress like a clown and do an entire jig, and it still won't be enough to crack through Night-Eye's clear displeasure. "Hello! I brought you that first tier I told you about yesterday!" Mirio says, completely oblivious to the situation. Nighteye silently approaches them as Izuku stood there, frozen. His light was sharp, cutting, almost feeling like a needle poking at Izuku through his radar. He forces himself to gulp around the knot of nervousness in his throat, rushing to do a little proper bow and introduce himself. "I'm Izuku Midoriya, sir, pleased to meet you." After that, he held his hand out, nervous, wondering if Nighteye will shake it or not. Relief washes over him when Night-Eye's light moves in a way that suggests he's about to reciprocate the handshake, and then it shifts. Izuku tenses, rushing to take his hand back with a snappy motion before Nighteye could touch him, eyes going wide. Behind him, Mirio's light shakes in surprise and then turns a bit nervous as the silence stretches for a handful of seconds. "Were you trying to use your quirk on me?" Izuku asks, voice rasping on his dry throat. "Sir?" he adds, trying to recover a shred of politeness. Night-Eye's light shifts in surprise before it smooths over once more. "How do you know?" he asks, voice flat. "I can see certain things with my quirk," Izuku replies, voice low, assessing the situation. The atmosphere took a nosedive, and even the ever-so-optimistic Mirio feels concerned. Nighteye hums before speaking once more, apparently unaffected. "Mirio, leave us. Me and Midoriya have some things to discuss. Now tell me, for whichever reason should I bother employing you?" Nighteye asks, sitting at his desk in front of the already filled form that Izuku handed him. "This office goes by just fine with 2 sidekicks and 1 intern student. What exactly do you have to offer me?" Izuku gulps, trying his best to keep both hands still at his sides and not fidget nervously with his own fingers. "I've studied your methods, sir," he replies, willing his voice to be steady. "You do not rush into action mindlessly. Carefully studied plans are the base of your modus operandi. My quirk allows me to observe and gather a lot of useful info, from the plementary of a building, to the number of people present and how distant they are, to their feelings and intentions. I can even feel when someone is lying to me." A pause. "And as you have observed already, I can tell when someone is using their quirk, if they have an emitter or transformation type. I believe that my abilities will prove useful for your work." Nighteye doesn't sound particularly impressed. "Are you an empath?" "Yes, sir." "A weakness?" Nighteye immediately replies, flat. "Empathic quirks are fickle, and empaths can be very easily overwhelmed and can lose their control at the drop of a hat. A hero's duty is to stay calm in the face of danger, to be able to take the right decisions when others might fall into panic. Such a risky, unstable quirk is not something that mesh well with said job. Doesn't sound like something that would prove to be useful to me." Izuku barely manages to hold a flinch, staying silent and working his lower lip. Nighteye has a point, but Izuku is becoming increasingly better at keeping his own feelings under control, and there's so much he could do with his quirk. "You were not wrong, sir. Izuku admits slowly. But I'm working hard to refine my control over my quirk, and I believe that working under your guidance will help me doing so even more. If you could be willing to give me a chance, why should I? Nighteye stands, circling the desk. Izuku turns his face up at the light looming over him. Seems like you will be the only one to gain something from this internship, and... A moment of silence. You failed to show me your willingness to make other people smile. Wasn't that one of the things you said to Mirio? That you wanted to make other people smile. Because, let me tell you, you are doing a lousy job of it. Izuku frowns, fingers nervously picking at the fabric of his pants. Nighteye is a stone wall, unmoving and unaffected, and nothing Izuku could possibly say would manage to even chip through the concrete surrounding his heart. Nighteye sighs. As I imagined, All Might took the wrong decision. Despite the fact it was his right to choose his own successor, he has done it hastily and without really thinking in depth about it. At that, Izuku's eyes widens a bit. He didn't say anything about All Might so far, and yet Nighteye is the one to bring up the word successor. All Might said that he and Nighteye did not agree about some things. Was one of those things me? As I thought, Mirio should have been the one to inherit One for All. The silence that fell on them was so thick, Izuku could feel it in his mouth as oxygen comes to lack for a second. His heart dropped to the floor, pain and surprise a mix in his soul. Mirio-senpai? I simply cannot understand, Nighteye says, almost sounding as if he's talking to himself. I cannot fathom what All Might's intentions are, but let me make something clear. The way he spoke, voiced low and yet clear, clinical, not an inflection in his tone, was unnerving. Nighteye continued, uncaring. All Might should have seen that there was someone much more worthy to receive his power. I do not acknowledge you in the slightest. That stung like a knife in his back. Izuku had years to familiarize himself with the sensation of being nothing but a blip in other people's lives, something that would be easily forgot the moment you take your eyes off said blip. But this was different. Nighteye felt as if he completely acknowledged him as a person and had absolutely no qualms in dismantling him piece by piece. Izuku got so used to being surrounded by people willing to help him overcome his shortcomings that this sudden wall in his path felt jarring. And yet something in his stomach boiled. The need to show Nighteye wrong, that All Might's decision wasn't rushed or not thought out. The need to show him he was worthy of All Might's trust. The need to show him his assessment of Izuku was completely misplaced. You say this, Izuku started slowly and controlled. You say you think my quirk is a weakness, that you cannot understand All Might's intentions. But that is not the truth, isn't it? Nighteye feels surprised for a single second. Izuku continues. I think you are just testing me, and I think you are lying to yourself. I think you are grasping for something to shield yourself with, and that you understand why All Might took the decision he took perfectly well. A pause, Izuku's voice lowering. I think that at the end of the day, you just don't want to admit to yourself just how much you truly miss him. Night-Eye's light was completely still, a soup of conflicting emotions suddenly rising in him like a wave during a storm. The moment lasts but a handful of seconds before the calmness smooths him over once more as he takes a deep breath. Mirio, come back in, he says, voice louder, surprising Izuku. The door opens, Mirio-senpai's indecisive light entering once more. He's hired. Izuku gapes, shocked, as relief washes over Mirio's light, that exclaims a cheerful, "Huh? That's great! Congratulations, Midoriya!" Nighteye has moved back to his desk, and Izuku heard the thump of the stamp being pressed on the document before it's being handed back to him. Let's make something clear, Nighteye says, voice low. I still do not acknowledge you. But you have demonstrated that you can be of use to this office even though you do not have a single ounce of humor in you. That's not true, Izuku replies, his traitorous mouth moving before he can stop it. It's not like I lack humor, but a lot of people don't like my blind jokes. They don't see the point. There's a long second of silence before Nighteye releases the tiniest little chuckle, Mirio laughing heartily from the door. Mirio-senpai's good mood about Izuku's successful attempt at getting hired seems to last well into the day. Even as they went for their first patrol together in the afternoon after Nighteye gave him a briefing about the current case his office was investigating regarding the Yakuza group that called themselves the 8 Precepts of Death and the man that was the head of the group, Chisaki. Mirio had been more than happy to introduce Izuku to the basics after he admitted to him that during his week with Gran Torino he ended up not having a chance to go for a real patrol. He was much more experienced, and Izuku drank it all up as they walked in the streets side by side in their costumes. That was until something piqued Izuku's attention. A small light completely drenched in fear and despair and pain not far in the distance. When he stopped, Mirio turned to him. "Deku?" he asked, perplexed, using his hero name since they technically were on the job. "Is everything alright?" "No," Izuku replied, voice low. "Follow me." He didn't wait for Mirio's answer, turning to take a left, and Mirio followed him confused. "Someone's in trouble," Izuku explained to Mirio's unasked question in a low voice. "I can feel someone's leg completely plunged in fear. I think they might be very young. They are coming this way." He took another turn just after putting a finger on his lips, signing to Mirio to keep silent. Mirio hummed his understanding, following closely as Izuku took another turn and then stopped at an intersection, leaning down on his knees just in time to catch the little light that was running desperately right toward them. Mirio's light was shook by a surprised ripple at that, immediately turning worried. The little light hiccuped and sobbed in Izuku's arms, astonished by their sudden appearance, but not any less terrified and suffering. It stung at Izuku's heart, the depth of this pain and fear coming from someone that was clearly just a child, as small fingers immediately closed on Izuku's costume, frantic. "Don't be afraid," Izuku said, soothing, putting a gentle hand on the child's head, tentatively releasing a sense of calmness with his quirk, hoping to help them a bit. "I'm Deku, and this is my friend Lemillion. We are both heroes. We can help you, I promise. What's your name?" "Eri," the child replied, her voice tiny. Izuku's attempt to soothe her seemed to be working, even if just barely. "Please take me away, please." Another light was approaching, and Izuku wasted no time in grabbing her and rising back to his feet, Eri held firmly in his arms. She circled his shoulders with little hands, trustful, a shred of relief washing into her. "We have to go," Izuku whispered, and in front of Mirio's faint indecisiveness, he added, "Now!" Mirio turned resolute at that, putting a hand on his shoulder, firm, guiding him away. For each step they took, Eri's light seemed more and more relieved as she hung onto Izuku for dear life, making Izuku feel both a sense of dread and reassurance in noticing he definitely took the right decision in wanting to remove this child from whichever situation she was running away from. "It's okay. It will be okay," Izuku kept whispering to her, gently rubbing her back. "Me and Lemillion are here with you now. Nothing bad will happen to you, I promise. I promise." It was heartbreaking how, despite the small smudge of hope and relief, her light was still plunged in a darkness so deep, Izuku could not believe it was even possible to feel. Just what happened to this poor girl to make her feel like this? "Excuse me," came a male voice from all the way down the alley after the light they attempted to get away from closed in much faster, turning the corner. "What are you doing with my daughter?" Mirio launches a tiny look to Midoriya at his side. The little girl was hanging so tight on his costume, her knuckles were white. She paled as soon as the man called for them, if that was even possible, curling against Midoriya even more. She was already pale to begin with her long silver hair making her look like a ghost. A terrified, clearly hurt ghost. Midoriya's face turns a bit ashen too at the voice, his gloved hands tightening a bit around Eri's small frame, as if he'd rather die than let her go. A frown immediately took place on his face, his pale eyes turning just a bit toward Mirio as if he was trying to convey something. Danger, they seem to say. Midoriya's expression smooths over in a forcefully blink one as they both turned. Mirio could only thank the year of experience he had under his belt working for Sir, for the fact he manages to keep his composure despite the fact they were face to face with none other than Chisaki himself. He said his daughter. This young girl is Chisaki's daughter. I'm sorry, sir. We mean no harm, Midoriya says, voice firm. We just so happened to stumble into Eri, and she seemed troubled. And well, it's a hero's duty to help those in need, isn't it? Chisaki sniffs from under his mask. You two are heroes, huh? I never saw you before, you rookies. Which office are you affiliated with? We are just students on a field training, Mirio intervenes, plastering a smile on his face. Sir, you have quite an awesome mask. Could you possibly be a member of the 8 Precepts? You guys are quite famous around these parts, I heard. Midoriya seems to go a bit tense for a second, and Mirio saw out of the corner of his eyes his tiny jerky nod. Message received. Do not pay any mind to the mask. I'm quite sensitive to dust. Chisaki replies amicably. Thank you for trying to help my daughter, but I assure you there's no need. You know how kids are. She just ran because I scolded her. You can let her go now, young hero. There's a long, tense moment as Midoriya hesitates. His hands are firm around Eri, and she's still hanging to him desperately, her face pressed against Midoriya's shoulder. Mirio saw it, the tears pooling in her wide, terrified red eyes through the strands of long hair. Seems like she's really upset, Midoriya says when the silence is reaching its breaking point, forcing a smile on his face. Maybe I could soothe her a bit, if you don't mind, sir. I'm quite good with kids. A very generous offer, but I won't want to waste your time. I'm sure such young heroes as you must be very busy. Chisaki takes a step forward. Come on, Eri, you don't want to trouble these kind young men now, do you? There's something Mirio cannot pinpoint in Chisaki's voice, but that still manages to freeze the blood in his veins. And he knows it's not just an impression, because Eri goes absolutely still in Midoriya's embrace for a second before she forcefully pushes against him to get down on the floor. Midoriya stumbles forward, forced to lean down as to not drop her on concrete, and she turns away from them, running toward Chisaki. Midoriya clutches at the air, looking as if someone ripped a piece of his soul out of his body. She's always like this, Chisaki sighs, taking her hand with his gloved one. Thank you for your help, heroes. Good day. And with that, he disappears into the dark alley with Eri, her little shoulders slumped as if she's carrying the weight of the world on them. Midoriya doesn't speak the whole way back, only asking Mirio if the man they met was Chisaki, his tone of voice suggesting that he knew already and only wanted confirmation. When they met with Sir and Bubble Girl at the corner near the office, it had started to rain, the thin but insistent drops rapidly making their hair droopy. Sir listened to the recounter of their meeting with Chisaki and the girl he called his daughter, silent. We had no other choice but to let her go. When Midoriya speaks, his voice is low and bitter. Chisaki, he went completely murderous. He would have killed us. Eri must have known that's why she ran back to him. She did it to protect us, even if she was absolutely terrified. A heavy silence falls on them as Midoriya angrily swipes his wrist against his eyes. Sir doesn't comment, looking just barely on his side as if giving him a moment of privacy. I understand your frustration, Sir says in a low voice, but this information is another piece of the puzzle we can snap into place. Hopefully our investigation will soon bear some fruits. I don't know if this can help, but I pinned her, Midoriya says, rough, and he must feel their confusion because he quickly adds, It's a thing I've been practicing recently. I can leave a trace of energy on people like a pin on a map, and that allows me to feel them in my radar at all times. When they get out of my range, I can still feel in which direction they are. They all blink at him, the three of them. Bubble Girl looks thoroughly impressed, and even Sir's eyes seem to regard Midoriya with a certain amount of curiosity. Despite how terrible the whole situation is, Mirio cannot help but feel a tinge of proudness in himself. He knew Midoriya was going to be a good match with Sir Nighteye. I understand. Mirio, you go with Bubble Girl and finish your round. Midoriya, come with me. Let's see where this pin in your radar leads. Sir says, practical, adjusting his glasses. You must follow my orders at all times, as this might be very risky. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Midoriya replies immediately, determined. Mirio gives him a brief shoulder squeeze, a silent encouragement that Midoriya seems to pick up as he nods back, and then they part ways. Toshinori gave up any pretense of being casual and has straight up decided to sit down by the stairs leading to Class 1A dormitories. The sun has long disappeared into the horizon, only a deep red tint hanging on as the last rays leave place to the dark blue of the night. A suspected young Midoriya might stay the whole day out in case Nighteye accepted him into his office, which is already a reassurance. He would have surely come back sooner had he been rejected. But still, he can't help but be worried by the fact the boy's running so late already on his first day. If Toshinori has learned something in the months he spent with young Midoriya, is that his young pupil is pretty much a trouble magnet. Once he'd graduate and go pro, he'd surely be one of the most efficient heroes out there, if only for the fact that he didn't have to search for problems. The problems just went straight for him. It takes another good 20 minutes, the evening fully enveloping them, before young Midoriya finally comes back, cane in a hand, the suitcase with his costume in the other. His expression is pinched, clearly troubled. It doesn't seem to bode well. Toshinori stands, walking to meet him halfway. Young Midoriya! The boy blinks, surprised, and the ghost of a smile passes on his lips for a second before leaving space back to the worried little frown. Hey, did I accidentally turn toward the teacher's accommodations? No, I was just waiting for you. Toshinori chuckles as the boy stops in front of him when he gently pokes his foot with the cane. I wanted to know how your day went. Midoriya props the cane against his own body before dragging a tired hand on his face. It was intense, he says, voice carefully measured. Actually, I'd like to ask you something since you are here. Can you give me a minute to put down this stuff first? Of course. Toshinori concedes, and the boy only nods, walking past him to disappear in the dormitories. He comes back a mere 3 minutes later, sans costume, still clutching at his cane. Toshinori puts a hand on his shoulder, a quiet sign he's near him, and they walk side by side down the stone-paved road, silent. Young Midoriya looks pensive, his mouth a thin line. Toshinori gives him time, as he's clearly mulling over his words. Mirio-senpai, he finally says, voice low. Was he the person meant to receive one for all, at first? Toshinori blinks, holding the sigh he feels rising from his chest. Did Nighteye tell you? It came up at some point. A pause. As we were discussing the details of my possible employment. A lot seems to be crammed into that sentence, and Toshinori suddenly feels like he's playing a game of word Jenga. He hums, thoughtful, biding a few seconds as he mulls over the way young Midoriya worded his response. He was a possible candidate, yes, Toshinori admits, slowly. I contacted Principal Nezu with the intention to search for a successor between UA students, and between all, young Mirio seemed to be a promising one. But that was before I met you. He steals a glance at the boy. His expression is blank, pale eyes pointed forward, but the tight grip on his cane betrays his nervousness. Mirio-senpai is strong and smart. He would probably be able to do a lot of good with One for All, he murmurs. You fought with Nighteye over this, didn't you? It's not quite a question. Toshinori hums, confirming his suspicion. Why? Young Midoriya asks, pained. If both Principal Nezu and Nighteye considered Senpai a good candidate, why did you...
When my master chose me,
Toshinori sighs.
She told me something that stayed with me. She told me that she saw something in me. And she couldn't put this feeling into words. It wasn't something logical nor rooted in a calculated decision. She just saw something that made her think I was the right choice.
Toshinori nervously licks his lips before adding,
And the same happened to me. When I met you, I just knew. Nighteye is a grounded, rational person. He could not understand this gut feeling I had.
The boy frowns, pale eyes moving as he's deep in thought. Softly, Toshinori adds,
I never, not even once, regretted my decision. I just know that you are the best person to handle One for All, and I have no doubt you will be able to prove it as you grow more and more.
At that, the boy's shoulders slump forward with a sigh as he drags a tired hand on his face. His gesture made Toshinori think he might be drying tears, but when the boy takes his hand away, his eyes are dry, if glinting with a strange, intense light. That's not the only reason you fought with Nighteye, though, didn't you? He asks, softly. This part, at least, is something they already went through. Toshinori doesn't like to linger on the memory of young Midoriya's shutdown before they even knew about the empathic side of his quirk. But at least this time he should be prepared. Not that touching upon this topic will make things any less painful.
No.
Toshinori admits, careful.
You know of Nighteye's quirk.
The boy nods, so he continues.
After my fight with All for One 6 years ago, Nighteye urged me to retire, but I refused. The wound I sustained was severe, as you know, and he saw my future. He saw that if I kept going down the path of heroism, he said that I would clash with the villain, and that I would not come out of it alive.
Young Midoriya stopped cold in his tracks, eyes going wide. Toshinori turned to him slowly as the boy's mouth tensed in a thin line. That's why you told me you didn't know if... He says, voice rough but trailing off, unable to complete the sentence.
Yes.
How long?
Nighteye's visions aren't clear, the more in the future they go.
A sigh.
He estimated 6 or 7 years.
Young Midoriya flinches, both hands nervously clutching at his cane as his face points downward. His expression twisted as he clearly tries to rein in the tears that are pooling in his eyes. Toshinori covers the short distance between them, putting a gentle hand on his soft hair.
When he told me that, I accepted it.
Toshinori says, carefully.
Because I knew it was easy to just run forward. And then the battle at Camino Ward happened, and I could not use One for All anymore. And All for One was standing there gloating before dealing the killing blow, and I thought, this is it. I was in peace because I knew that I left my power in good hands and that you kids would be taken care of.
A beat of silence.
But then you were there.
The boy blinks, turning anguished eyes up to him.
You changed my fate.
Toshinori adds, voice lowering.
You challenged Nighteye's visions, which have always been infallible. And in that moment I knew I wanted to keep on living. And then what your mother said to me, you changed everything.
A little sad smile pulls at Toshinori's lips when the tears spill down the boy's cheeks.
Now I don't want to run toward that fate anymore. I want to grab it in my own hands and destroy the future Nighteye saw for me. I want to keep living. For you and all your classmates.
Young Midoriya sobs, stepping forward as he let his cane drop on the floor, both arms circling around Toshinori's waist firmly. Toshinori takes him in, gentle, a small sigh shaking his frame as he leans down a bit to envelop the boy in a hug.
Nighteye was right about many things, and that's why after our fight I cannot bring myself to face him out of shame.
Toshinori whispers.
But what he saw in my future, and is rejecting my decision to entrust One for All to you. They are things that I know he's wrong about.
Young Midoriya nods against his chest, sniffing. Toshinori doesn't add anything else, just standing in the embrace, carting his long fingers through the soft curls, consoling. When he seems to have calmed down a bit, young Midoriya takes a small step back, looking up at Toshinori with still wet, pale eyes. So, Nighteye wanted you to retire to avoid this fate, and you two fought when you refused, he says, voice rough. I think I definitely understand some things now. Toshinori blinks.
Like what?
The boy seems to take some seconds to think, frowning. You and I are more alike than I thought, he says, only adding to Toshinori's confusion, but then he adds, it's like looking in a mirror. I'm scared of confronting Kacchan and our shared past, just as much as you are scared of doing the same with Nighteye. Toshinori groans at just how spot on that sentence seems to be, which drags a little rat chuckle out of Midoriya, but then his expression smooths over. I won't pretend to tell you what to do, nor to know what the right choice is, he says, careful. I'm just a kid, but if I have to be honest, I think you should speak with Nighteye. The pause seems to endlessly stretch before young Midoriya adds in a low voice. He just misses you. A lot. There were many things that Izuku felt upon waking up Saturday morning. The dread and weight on his heart at the fresh memories of Eri's light, just how pained terrified she was. Night-Eye's rough, deep melancholy that emerged in him whenever the topic came close to All Might. The other half of a truth that he already knew and that never stopped to hurt. When they came back the evening prior, Mirio-senpai's hand had been gentle on his shoulder. This was certainly a rough first day, but you did all you could, he said, kind. Sure, we'll find a way to save her, I promise. And you will be right there when the day will come. Izuku thanked him, grateful for the honesty in his words. They parted ways, setting an appointment for the next morning to meet up and go back to their now shared office, feeling just slightly more hopeful. All Might added to that hope, too. Their little discussion had been painful, but All Might admitting his decision to challenge fate had been so uplifting. To know the man wasn't just willingly and knowingly walking toward a certain death anymore, but wishing to fight and live. When Shoto came back almost close to the curfew, they didn't really have time to talk. Izuku was bound to secrecy anyway, not having the permission to speak of the investigation Nighteye was pushing forward, and Shoto was absolutely exhausted by the training course, so they pretty much fell asleep in each other's arms right away, sharing Izuku's bed once more. When he woke, Shoto's presence by his side was enough to lift a bit of the weariness Izuku felt, as he took the liberty to gently brush his fingertips along the rough texture of Shoto's scar. Shoto groaned himself awake as his own alarm rung from Izuku's nightstand, where his phone was sitting. They shared a silent but comfortable breakfast, and if they spent some minutes just cuddling and kissing before parting ways for the day once again, no one really had to know. There were a lot of things plaguing Izuku's mind that Sunday, but the idea that what was happening to him might actually happen was not one of them. They went for another patrol, he and Mirio-senpai, much like the day prior. And much like the day prior, something went wrong, like a chain of events neither of them could have predicted. A series of yells and screams went off in the distance, Mirio immediately snapping into action, urging Izuku to follow him. Izuku did, and would have kept following if it wasn't for the fact that a light nearby in his radar suddenly spiked with terror. Izuku stopped at that and didn't have the time to warn Senpai as he kept running forward quick, getting lost in the noise of the city and the panic far from them. The light Izuku felt was absolutely terrified, surrounded by a small group, and Izuku hesitated for all of 2 seconds before taking a turn. Mirio could take care of what was happening in the distance. Izuku would catch up later. He couldn't just leave when he knew someone was in trouble. He approached carefully. Something was off. The group was murmuring in voices too low for Izuku to hear, and none of them seemed to release outright aggression, but despite that, the terrified light just kept being terrified. As Izuku tried to assess the situation from behind a corner, a woman sobbed. "Please, let me go. I have a son," she pleads. "Nothing against you, ma'am," a male voice replies, slurred. "We gotta do a job for the boss. Now just follow us and be nice, and I promise nothing will happen to you." Izuku focuses. It wasn't easy to tell, but it seemed that the terrified woman was kept at knife point. Gritting his teeth, Izuku steeled himself, silently activating One for All. The group surrounding the woman was small, just 3 people. If he intervened quickly enough, he might be able to take them down before they had time to react. He took in a deep breath before springing into action. But something went wrong. He felt the surprise in the lights as soon as he made a dash for them, and he was so close to hit one of them before Izuku's head spun violently, and he felt like the ground was suddenly made of jelly. His balance went completely out of whack, and he ended up rolling on the sidewalk, his senses going haywire. Got him! Little fish came right to us before we could even cast the net, the slurred voice says with a little laugh. Shin! Izuku tries to stand and mostly fails, his head still spinning, absolutely confused, as one of the lights steps forward. "Your name is Izuku Midoriya, and yesterday you met Overhaul and his daughter Eri. Am I right?" Another voice asks flatly. "Yes," Izuku replies, the word out of his mouth of its own volition. It took him a second through the confused haze of his spinning head to realize that both men were using their quirks on him. "It's him," the second voice adds. "Let him go, Sakaki." As sudden as it came, the lack of balance disappeared, allowing Izuku to finally climb back on his feet. "Let's make something clear," the second man, presumably Shin, says. "If you try to attack us again, this woman dies." The terror in the woman's light and her whimper is enough to convince Izuku they are serious. "So if you follow us silently and don't try to do anything funny, we'll spare her. Do you understand?" "Yes," Izuku replies once more, feeling like he had no real control over his mouth. Shin used his quirk again as he posed the question. Must be some kind of truth-forcing quirk. Izuku realizes, silent as the third light that had no voice nor name yet shoved him rudely forward when they started to move. As they walk, Izuku shifts his hand ever so slowly, stopping whenever it felt as if any of the 3 enemy lights were observing him. It took him far longer than it should, but Izuku manages to slip his hand into his pocket and, with memorized, practiced gestures, activate the recording app on it. He had no idea what these men's intentions are, and hopefully his phone signal would pinpoint his position to both Senpai and Sir Nighteye. If Izuku managed to collect some info in the meantime, it'd be all the better. They walk for what feels like an eternity, the still terrified woman letting out little broken sobs every now and then. Izuku is extending his quirk as much as he can without drawing attention to himself with the beeping red light, completely focused, memorizing every single detail he could of the path they were taking and the surrounding area. He's already fairly familiar with the district, having made a point of studying it yesterday, as he and Nighteye went on their little reconnaissance mission. But now he's literally burning it into his mind. If these men were leading him to Chisaki, Izuku might be able to gather some really useful information. It comes to no surprise when Chisaki's now familiar light blips into his radar, and even less so when they finally stop in front of him. "Got you the boy, boss," the slurred man says, sounding almost drunk. "Young hero," Chisaki greets him almost amicably. "You are quite an interesting one, and also a whole lot of trouble. You see, after my daughter met you yesterday, she started throwing even more tantrums. As you can imagine, I cannot have this." Izuku does not reply, standing still, hands closed into fists at his side. "I've decided to look up some info about you. So are you really blind? When Izuku refuses to reply once more, Chisaki sighs. Shin, if you please. How are you blind? Shin asks, and as Izuku imagined, the yes came out of his unwilling mouth yet again. Truth-forcing quirk. This is bad. This is really bad. I have to twist the truth somehow. They get infected younger and younger these days, Chisaki says again. I wonder how you move so easily, especially considering your quirk seems to be some kind of strength enhancement. That's your quirk, isn't it? Izuku refuses to reply, thinking feverishly. Technically it is, so if he hangs on the thought that a quirk he has is some kind of strength enhancement, Is your quirk strength augmentation? Shin asks without the need to be ordered, and Izuku feels relief wash over him as he answers, Yes. Once more. Yes, good brain. Keep them on an info diet. So, how do you move, since you are blind? Chisaki almost sounds interested, and Izuku fakes a little resigned sigh, hopeful to lull them into a sense of security before asking, My support items, he says, sounding forlorn, poking at one of his amplifiers. They help me orientate myself. Silly boy, hanging to the ideal of heroes to the point of challenging your own limits so brazenly. Chisaki says, Toya, take them away. Let's remind the kid why he was born the way he was. The third man, that hasn't spoke a single word so far, seems to activate his quirk, and Izuku hisses when suddenly his scope abruptly tightens around him, as both his amplifiers seem to disappear off of him in the time of a blink. Despite being involuntary, the hiss seems to help Izuku's case, as they must all think he's completely blind now. This is why you should have stayed put and not butt your nose in other people's affairs, Chisaki adds, now fully blinded once more. Tell me, Midoriya, Izuku, do you still want to play hero? Do you still want to save Eri? Izuku doesn't need Shin's intervention to growl his sincere, Yes! Absolutely! The men around him chuckle as if they find the concept funny. Chisaki seems to take a moment, his hum muffled behind the mask. Well, it's your lucky day then, because I'm bringing you to her. What? Izuku exhales, unable to contain his shock. You see, hero, you left such an impression on her that she's been unmanageable since yesterday. Chisaki says sarcastic. So I promised her I would bring her a new toy to keep her calm. See, I'm not a thoughtless father, aren't I? I'm going to bring my daughter a shiny new gift to distract herself. A shiver ran down to Izuku's spine as one of the men, Shin, put a rough hand on his arm, grip painful, jerking him forward. They searched him, taking his phone and belt away from him, tossing them somewhere. They didn't seem to have noticed he was recording, and Izuku was hopeful the object might be recovered with a bit of luck. Shin kept his painful grip on Izuku's arm for the entire trip, as Izuku pretended to stumble into things more than a couple of times, selling his presumed blindness some more. In the meantime, he kept focusing, committing to memory every single road, nook, and cranny. If they are really bringing me to Eri, if I can make a fast enough escape with her, I might be able to use the surprise factor and make a dash with one for all. If they think I have no way to orientate myself, they might let their guard down. Izuku was not surprised once they walked back into a familiar series of road, because he knew them already, as they were clearly directed to Chisagi's mansion, and Eri was there too, just as she was yesterday when Izuku showed Nighteye. The mansion that he has thoroughly studied already, along with Nighteye, the day prior. A place he knew deeply at this point, despite everything. They stopped in front of it for a minute, some new lights taking the still sobbing, terrified woman away. Izuku could only hope that they'd keep their word and not harm her at this point. They guided him down in the clearly secret floors under the main body of the mansion. They were being careful, too, forcing Izuku to take needless detours and spin him around, clearly making sure he couldn't memorize the twists and turns properly, unaware of the fact Izuku had already pretty much memorized the place down to a T. Izuku forced a confused, lost expression on his face, playing the part of the blind, lost guy. It was a challenge to keep that expression on himself when they finally approached the room Eri was kept in. The loud sound of a heavy steel door being opened fills the air for a second, and Eri's light turns shocked when they step in. "See, Eri, I told you I would bring you your new friend," Chisaki says flat. "It will keep you company from now on. As long as you keep being a good, obedient girl, nothing will happen to him. Am I clear?" Izuku has to force himself really hard not to punch Chisaki in the teeth, threatening the poor girl like that. "Yes." Eri hiccups, tears clear in her voice. Izuku is violently pushed forward, and his stumbling is not pretended this time. He falls on his knees, incapable to stop himself from turning back toward the little group of men, angrily baring his teeth. "This is why I can't stand this youth infected with the hero syndrome," Chisaki sighs. "Despite everything, I can tell you will be trouble if we leave things as they are." Izuku hears rustling and then Eri crying aloud, "No!" right before a bang. Something painfully stings on Izuku's neck, making him hiss and tense, and then in a matter of seconds, his radar seems to fade off, leaving him in utter darkness, completely out of Izuku's control. "There. Now your super strength quirk is gone. Shin, please make sure to have some men take his costume away and to restrain him appropriately," Chisaki says, uninterested. "Since you wanted to help Eri so much, Midoriya, I'm giving you the chance. You can be her little doll. Enjoy your stay." The heavy steel door closes as Izuku tries and fails to turn his radar back on, heart beating in his throat. What did Chisaki mean? What he said? Little arms circles Izuku's shoulders as sobs wreck Eri's slim frame against him, snapping him out of his rushed train of thoughts. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," she murmurs, desperate, her little voice barely understandable through the sobs. "This is all my fault." He tries to turn his radar on once more, but nothing happens. It feels like there's nothing anymore in him, where that distant feeling of his quirk has always taken place ever since he turned it on consciously for the first time. Chisaki said that his quirk was gone. Izuku's quirk is gone. And as the implications of what this means crushes on Izuku, he can't help but gently hug the young girl back with shivering arms while she desperately cries on his shoulder. He gulps as his breath becomes shorter and panic threatens to fill his head. A hero's duty is to stay calm in the face of danger. Nighteye reprimands him from a corner of his mind. Izuku takes a series of deep breaths, counting to 20, slowly, still hanging tightly to Eri. Having gained back a resemblance of calmness, he calls to something else, and immense relief washes over him when he realizes that even if his radar somehow seems to be gone, he still has one for all. "Eri?" he murmurs, rough, barely loud enough to make sure only the girl would hear him. "This is not your fault. But I... She sobs, shaking her head against him. "I'm so sorry." "It's okay. You have nothing to be sorry for. This is not your fault," Izuku whispers again, carting his fingers through her long hair. "I will get you out of here. I promise." Her breath itches in her chest in surprise, her little hands tightening on Izuku's costume. Izuku grits his teeth as the last lingering feelings of panic leaves him, giving way to a quiet sense of anger for what these men have done to Eri, for this disgusting attempt to manipulate her through Izuku. He will not let it happen. He will save this girl this time. "I promise," Izuku repeats, voice firm and unwavering.